Shabbat Shalom. I just want to welcome everyone to the Sabbath Day conference call. And this is Barbara serving as your host today, and Brother Pete is here as your co-host.
Yes, and I also welcome you to join us for this exciting study.
Well, our title is 10 Bible Verses that Prove the Lunar Calendar. And we're going to go through all 10 of these, and we're starting out with Genesis 1:14.
Genesis 1:14. And Elohim said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years."
So the moon is a sign to show us the plan of weeks and months. And you'll see the graph right ahead here showing the divisions of weeks and a whole month. The sun is a sign to show us the plan of days and years. So here you can see in spring and summer, a day will last longer, and the winter, a day shorter. And the sun shows that plan. Month. This is from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. A measure of time corresponding nearly to the period of the moon's revolution and amounting to approximately 4 weeks or 30 days or 1/12 of a year. Well, there are 7 biblical units of time that you can find in your Bible. There's hours, 1 hour, 60 minutes. 1 day is 24 hours. 1 week is 7 days. 1 month, 30 days. 1 year, 12 months. And a century is 100 years, and a millennium, 1,000 years. So all these units of time can be found in your scriptures. And we found out in Genesis 1:14, and Elohim said, "Let there be light in the firmaments of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, seasons, days, and years." So the moon, here I have highlighted in red. The moon is for weeks and months. The sun, here in yellow, the sun is for the days and years. Basically, that's all you need to know to count time. So how do we know this? Because Elohim showed us the same pattern in the very beginning of the Holy Bible. Days and years are easy to understand. Well, what are signs and seasons? Again, Genesis 1:14 said, "Let them be lights for signs, seasons, days, and years." And Exodus 31:17 also says,
"It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days Yahweh made heaven and earth, and on the 7th day he rested and was refreshed." And the word for sign is actually ot. It's Hebrew 2:26, and it refers to the Hebrew word ot, translating to sign, token, or mark.
So, and God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons."
And that word seasons is moyed, or moyedim, which is Hebrew 4150. Hebrew 4150, seasons, moyed. The Hebrew word moyed primarily refers to an appointed time or place, often used in the context of a sacred festival or religious gathering.
Okay, so we've had our first verse, and our second verse is going to be in the book of Psalms. As the same Hebrew word was used for seasons in Psalms 104:19, which we're going to read, some translated it as seasons of the year. Biblically speaking, there are festivals that are based on the observation of the moon. And to prove this, we will use another verse from our list, where the same Hebrew word was used.
Genesis 1:14. And Yahweh said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, that was ot, and for seasons, that's moyed. Psalm 104:19, he appointed the moon for seasons, and the sun knoweth his going down.
Okay, and here's the Hebrew for that.
Moyed, the Hebrew word moyed, primarily refers to an appointed time or place, often used in the context of sacred festivals or religious gatherings.
Revelation is the last book of the Bible, and it also talks about the 4 units of time. Here we read it in the first book in Genesis, signs, seasons, days, and years. And then in Revelation, we also have it here, Brother Pete, Revelation 9:15.
And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour, and a day, and a month, and a year, for it to slay the 3rd part of men.
And so here they are, our units of time: hour, day, week, month, year. And to get a month, you have to have weeks, don't you? So all of those are listed in Genesis and in Revelation, the first book and the last book. So this shows the consistency of the Bible, doesn't it? Calendar basics. Well, the first 2 verses, Genesis 1:14 and Psalms 104:19, help us to pull out the calendar basics. However, the 3rd verse will help us to build the calendar. And it's found in Isaiah 66:23.
Isaiah 66:23, it shall happen that from one new moon to another, and from one Shabbat to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith Yahweh.
So this verse is an unfulfilled prophecy, and it talks about the future millennium of Yeshua Messiah. And here it is again. Remember, it said from one new moon to another and one Sabbath to another. So new moon is the first day of the month. We'll see it here on this graph. It's day 1. And the Sabbath is always the 7th day of the week. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th day of the week here. It would be number 8. So the new moon is the first day of the month. The Sabbath is always the 7th day of the week. Worship will take place from new moon to new moon and from Sabbath to Sabbath. To put it in simple words, we will worship Yah every month and every week. Isn't it amazing the true biblical calendar will be finally restored with the second coming of Yeshua Messiah? Before this happens, we must educate and prepare ourselves not to be surprised. The Gregorian calendar system that the whole world has followed is man-made. Isaiah 66:23 says we will worship on Sabbaths and new moons. So what else will we do in the millennium of Yeshua Messiah? Believe it or not, you will keep the Feast of Tabernacles. We will all keep the Feast of Tabernacles.
Zechariah 14:16, and it shall come to pass that everyone who is left of all the nations which have come against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and keep the Festival of Tabernacles.
Okay, Zechariah 14:16. That's what we just mentioned. That's number 4 in our verses. That they would go up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. So all the nations will come against Jerusalem, shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, Yahweh of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And you guessed it, this feast will be based on none other but this very calendar. Even in the time of Moses, this calendar was used to keep the same feast, the Feast of Tabernacles. And here it is in Leviticus.
Leviticus 23:34. Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, the 15th day of this 7th month shall be the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days unto Yahweh.
Okay, so you can see it on the calendar plan. That's the calendar in the heavens. You can see it begins on the 15th, which is one of the Sabbaths. The Sabbaths are 8, 15, 22, 29, and it will be for 7 days. The 5th verse talks about the same festival, but in a slightly different way. The Feast of Tabernacles in the future. Leviticus 23:39.
And so, on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the fruits of the land, you shall keep the feast of Yahweh 7 days. On the 1st day shall be a solemn rest, and on the 8th day shall be a solemn rest. And that's Leviticus 23:39.
Okay, well, so it said the 1st day will be a Sabbath and the 8th day a Sabbath. So Leviticus 23:39, the 1st day is a day of Sabbath rest, and the 8th day also is a day of Sabbath rest. As you can see, everything fits perfectly. Can you apply the same verse to a Gregorian calendar to go on from year to year and be exactly on the 15th or the 22nd? No, you can't. It would be impossible. Our next verse is from 2 Chronicles 29:17.
2 Chronicles 29:17. And they began to consecrate on the 1st day of the 1st month, and by the 8th day of the month they had reached the portico of Yahweh. For 8 more days they consecrated the temple of Yahweh itself, finishing on the 16th day of the 1st month.
Well, this was at the time of Hezekiah when the 2nd temple was dedicated. And if you know about when Solomon dedicated the 1st temple, that was at the time of Tabernacles. But this verse is talking about the 1st month of the year, and it's about the 2nd temple. So they began on the 1st day of the 1st month to sanctify, and on the 8th day of the month they came to the porch of Yah. So they sanctified the house of Yahweh in 8 days, and on the 16th day of the 1st month made an end. So they were there for the whole feast. Actually, it was a feast of Passover, and it was the full 7 days of that feast. So how do we know which is the 1st day of the month? Which day is New Moon Day? Well, here's our next verse. 1 Samuel 20:24 and 27.
Then David hid in the field, and when the new moon had come, the king sat down to eat the feast. And it happened the next day, the 2nd day of the month, that David's place was empty. And Saul said to Jonathan his son, why has the son of Jesse not come to eat, either yesterday or today? From this verse, you can clearly see that the new moon is always the 1st day of the month. New moon is not an ordinary day. We can find out more about this in our 8th verse. Blow the trumpet in the new moon, in the time appointed, on our solemn feast day.
Okay, that's Psalms 81:3 about blowing the trumpet on a new moon and a full moon you're going to see. And here is the Hebrew that goes along with it.
Blow up the trumpet in the new moon, in the time appointed, on our solemn feast day. This trumpet could also be heard on the full moon, which is here translated as time appointed. According to some scholars, that was most likely the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles, or Feast of Passover.
New moons and Sabbaths. Is there a big difference between the new moon and a Sabbath? Well, our 9th verse explains that both of these days were very important to our Elohim, and they still are important to him. And this verse is found in Ezekiel 46:1.
Ezekiel 46:1, and thus saith Yahweh Elohim, the gate of the inner court that looketh toward the east shall be shut the 6 working days, but on the Sabbath it shall be opened, and in the day of the new moon it shall be opened.
So you can see on the graph the working days are in red, and the Sabbath are in green, and new moon day is in green. And that is when those were worship days, the gates were open, work days, the gates were shut. So both new moon and Sabbath are special days on Yah's calendar. Any type of business activities were forbidden, which you can read more about from the book of Amos, chapter 8, verse 5. So finally, our last verse, which for some reason is sometimes more challenging to explain, is from Luke 6:1.
One Sabbath, Yeshua was passing through the grain fields, and his disciples began to pick the heads of grain and rub them in their hands and to eat them.
Okay, here we go. Their last, number 10 verse, Luke 6:1.
And it came to pass on the 2nd Sabbath after the first, that he went through the cornfields, and his disciples plucked the ears of corn, and did eat, rubbing them in their hands.
So you'll see here, to focus on the red, is you can see from the interlinear Bible that they are correctly translated in the KJV as the 2nd Sabbath after the first. But these words didn't fit the Gregorian calendar, so some translators decided to change the meaning of this verse. And we can see that, for example, in the most corrupted Bible of all our times, the NIV, because here's how they changed it to read, one Sabbath Jesus was going through the green fields. So the NIV changed it when it said the 2nd Sabbath after the first, which we can see that clearly on the Father's calendar. So more Bibles that got it wrong. Here's a whole list of them, NLT, ESV, all this whole list. But some Bibles still got it right, and that would be your New King James, DR Bible, NHEB, WNT, WEB, YLT. Anyways, it says the 2nd Sabbath after the first. And what exactly does the 2nd Sabbath after the first mean? The following is a list of a few theories from biblical scholars that could explain this mysterious verse.
1. The first Sabbath of the 2nd month of the Jewish year. The first Sabbath after the 2nd day of Passover. Pesach. The first Sabbath, this is 3, the first Sabbath in the 2nd year of the sabbatical cycle of 7 years. 4, the first Sabbath of the second half of the civil Jewish year. 5, the second Sabbath of the Feast of Pentecost.
Okay, so this is some of the explanations from the scholars. But it's plain for me to see, to keep things simple, it is the second Sabbath after the first Sabbath. It's very simple to see. The first Sabbath is the 8th day of the month, and the second Sabbath is the 15th. So whatever this verse means doesn't change the fact that it can only be applied to Yah's calendar, not a Gregorian calendar. So even when you go back to all these explanations, they're all applied to Yah's calendar, to the feast calendar. None of them are applied to a Gregorian calendar. So here it is, the second Sabbath after the first in the month. The biblical calendar was made by the Creator and craftily changed by men. There are over 100 verses that support the biblical calendar and none that support the Roman Gregorian calendar. So imagine if the Vatican had never existed and that they had never made the Gregorian calendar. What calendar would you follow then? Well, the answer is Yah's calendar, because his calendar existed from the beginning of the universe. So today I'm asking you to make a choice. There will not be two different calendars in Yah's kingdom, as nothing unclean can come close to him. So make your decision today. Which one will you follow? Which one will you preach? Which one will you defend? So to access more information about the Creator's calendar in the sky, we invite you to go to our website, LunarSabbathDay.com. It'll happen that from one new moon to another and from one Sabbath to another shall all flesh come to worship before me, says Yah. So thank you everyone for being here today, and I hope you will share this with others so that they will know about the true Sabbath and the true calendar that is in the heavens.